Welcome to Behind the Line, where we pull back the curtain on the challenges facing first responders and frontline workers. The work you do is unique, and so are the stresses that go with it. Join me as we tackle key issues to reduce risks for burnout, and as we work to support you in doing the job you love without sacrificing being the kind of person you want to be. Hey there, and welcome back to Behind the Line. I'm your host, Lindsay Foss. If you are new to Behind the Line, what you should know about me is that I'm a clinical counselor specializing in trauma therapy. And after over a decade working with first responders and frontline workers around issues like burnout, compassion fatigue, PTSD, and related OSIs, I've become a passionate wellness advocate and educator for those who sacrifice so much for our communities out on the front lines. Behind the Line is a place for us to talk about the real life behind the scenes challenges facing you on the front lines. I created this podcast with the hope of bringing easy access to skills for wellness, allowing you to find greater sustainability both on the job and off. Before I say anything else today, I'm actually going to ask you for a favor. If you've been a listener of Behind the Line for a little while now and you value this podcast, would you please take a moment and rate and review Behind the Line on Apple Podcast? Your support and feedback goes a long way in making this resource more visible to others who work in first response and frontline work. Thank you in advance for that. I am so grateful to be joined today by a colleague and wonderful human, Jake Khym. Jake is a Catholic leader with over 20 years experience in various religious and therapeutic settings. He has a master's degree in counseling psychology and a Bachelor of Arts in Theology with a concentration in Catechetics. Jake has worked in adult faith formation, seminarian and priestly formation, trauma therapy, and has had a private counseling practice for over 17 years. Currently, Jake offers human and pastoral formation to religious leaders, is a consultant to various ministries and organizations across North America, offers an annual men's retreat in British Columbia, Canada, accompanies male leaders on their journey of faith, and co-hosts 2 podcasts, Restore the Glory and Way of the Heart. With 2 children at university, Jake currently lives in Abbotsford, BC with his wife Heather and one of their 3 children. Jake seemed like the perfect person to join me in a conversation on wholehearted helping. Today we're going to dig into what it means to be helpers, the toll of the work in jading helping hearts, and our theories on retaining our humanity and hearts for helping under the pressure of heart-breaking systems. Let's dive in. Welcome, Jake. I'm so excited to have you here with me today. I'm really excited for this conversation that we're hoping to have around heart-based helping. Before we jump in, I would love it if you could take a few minutes to tell our audience a little bit about yourself, what it is that you do, who you are.
Awesome. Thanks, Lindsay. Thanks for having me. It's great to reconnect with you and see you again. So, Jake Khym, I am married for coming up on 23 years and have 3 kids. 2 are in university right now, but home for the summer, which is fun. And one more who's in grade 11. So she'll be going off to school here in a bit. I'll be an empty nester, which is really weird because that means you're old.
Yeah.
That will be me.
That means you're old.
That means, that means I'm old. Yeah. So that's on the home front. Yeah, I love my kids. I love my wife, but it's real. We're not perfect. You know, I was in counseling yesterday with my wife. So I live what I try to offer to other people. So, my wife and I also run a charity. It's called Life Restoration Ministries. And it's basically an umbrella where we do all of our stuff out of. And I've been a therapist since 2006 is when I finally got the paper that let me out there. And and I've done various forms of psychotherapy over the years for, to varying degrees, to varying extents, with varying populations. Used to have a really big private practice, and that I got massively burnt out. And now I have a very small practice. Do podcasting as well, and speaking, and I'll stop there.
All the things,
All the things.
that we will also link to in the show notes. So when people
Thank
fall
you.
in love with you in this conversation, they can go
Yeah.
and find other places to enjoy your thoughts.
Cool.
Because I know, like, when I think back on the first time I met you, and you probably wouldn't remember this because it was inconsequential, but I remember it super well. You came to our group counseling class when I was a student. So I think you graduated, and a year later I started
Okay.
in the same program. And so you had come to our group counseling class and did this demo. And I remember hearing about you. And so the prof for that course had done this big like drum up, like Jake Khym is
Oh
coming and
dear.
he's
Yeah.
masterful at this. And we had like high expectations because of that drum up. And I remember you coming, and I was a little like, well, we'll see if he lives up to the. You were amazing. And I remember leaving that class, and I think everyone in the class who could joined and did a private group with you for a period of time the rest of that year, because it was so impactful to be in that class. And I remember just really admiring your capacity to be very authentic in that space, like to come into a room of 30 something students and show up so genuinely,
Oh, thank
felt
you.
really consequential. And I remember thinking, he's not that, like, he hasn't been doing this that long. Like, that feels so amazingly natural for you to just embody this. And I think every interaction I've had with you since then, that's always how I've experienced you, is just
Thank you.
wherever you are that I have been with you, you just seem very you. And in a very like wonderful, engaging, connective kind of a way. I never feel like I need to like put something on with you,
Okay.
or like walk that like where do I stand with you thing,
Yeah.
you know? Like I just feel like you bring yourself very wholeheartedly to things, and I've really appreciated that. So when
Oh,
I was thinking about this conversation, you were the very first person who came to mind, because
oh,
I just feel like that's who you've been anytime I've been with you.
wow. Can we just stop there, and I'll just take this and like listen to it
Just
before I
hold
go?
on.
No, I really appreciate that, Lindsay. I have a great respect for you as well. There's some of us who went through the same formation and training and education, and some of us
Mhm.
kind of went out and put our shingle out, and it worked. And you're
Yeah.
definitely one of those people. And
Mm.
I've referred many a people to your practice, so I'm honored that you've
Thanks for
said all
that.
that. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. So, in that, then it brings us into this conversation. And I had prefaced this with you before we jumped on the recording that for me, so much of this conversation feels shaped by hearing so many people who are in first response and frontline work share about who they were when they went in,
Mm,
um, and like their motivations, right? The intentions they had to be like, I wanted to make the world a better place. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to help.
mm,
Fairly universally, that's the piece I hear.
yeah.
And then by the time they come to me with reflections on what's happened since they started, it's
Mm,
this place of like, I feel like I've lost parts of myself. I feel
mm,
like I have lost aspects of my humanity. I feel like I have become this version of a person I don't like.
yeah.
And so that's kind of the jumping off point, I think,
Yeah.
for me in wanting to tackle this topic.
Mm,
And I guess my curiosity is for you, like when you think about helping professions, and that can include ours,
yeah.
what do you think are some of the significant challenges that are facing workers in engaging their work sustainably from a really genuine, authentic, heart-based place, like that place that I mentioned? I feel like you just do really well.
Oh, thank you. Um, Man, that's an awesome. I'm glad we're asking the question, because one of the
Mhm.
first things that comes to mind is isolation is a killer.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
when you're in a helping profession, and if like take a firefighter.
Yeah.
It's one of the first questions that somebody asks you when they get to know you. What do you do?
Yeah.
And then you're slotted into this position of being someone who is heroic, which is true,
Yeah.
uh, and faces really hard things. And then all of a sudden, it's you can be treated as not normal anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that experience of isolation is brutal. And then sometimes amongst the cultures themselves within various, frontline workers, therapists, even pastors and all of that domain as well.
Yeah.
There's these weird cultures of I can't be weak. That means I failed. If somebody knows I'm struggling, I'll be fired. I'll be whatever. And so
Yeah.
isolation to me is deadly because humans aren't meant to be isolated. And if you
Yeah.
are, that's a fast track to
Totally.
burnout or all other kinds of stuff. Um, that's the first thing that comes to mind. I think beyond that, for me, if I'm honest, I allowed myself to get isolated. And yet
Mm.
I was saying to myself that, oh, I'm connecting. And I was,
Mm-hmm.
but it wasn't connecting about the realities of what I was doing and the toll that it was taking on me. And I didn't want to be the guy who quit, right? I didn't want to be
Yeah.
the guy who had to admit I couldn't do it. And so what that leads me to is my own personal dynamics that I bring into the workspace or into the helping
Mm-hmm.
professions. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, it's the joke in the therapy world that the people who need therapy the most are the people who become therapists, right? And I think some of that's
The
true, and I think
thing.
some of
Yeah.
that stereotype. I know we
Yeah.
all had our people in our cohorts who are like they shouldn't be a therapist, right? So, and I'm sure I
Totally.
was one of those people on somebody else's list. So,
Uh,
but the point is, and this is something that I try to preach to myself and other people, is do your own work, and
mm-hmm.
basically the stuff in my life that isn't congruent, that isn't whole, all it takes is pressure, whether it be a
Mm-hmm.
work pressure, a family pressure, a life pressure, and it exposes and draws to the surface the flaws or the issues. And so
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not addressing the stuff underneath the surface or, behind the line in my life and in my heart,
Yeah.
work's going to bring that up. And if I'm not comfortable with it, then I'm doubling down now on isolation. That's
Hmm.
that's a bad combo. Is I'm struggling, I can't talk to anybody about it. I have to be strong. That's a pretty nasty recipe.
Yeah. Totally. Well, and I love the identification about the isolation piece. One of the things I talk about a lot around resilience training is this
Mm.
idea of like connections protection.
Mm.
So when we reduce connection or we limit the diversity of our connection, we really like hold ourselves into this really tiny space and we lose protective factors, right? So, like, one of the things I talk with people about a lot is like, you have to have normal friends. And that means not other firefighters,
Yeah.
right? Like, you need to have friends who know that the world is good. You need to have friends who remind you that, like, you know, right? Like dying people are not like the normal
Yeah.
part of life. You need to be reminded that,
That's so
trauma
good.
is not the only thing that exists in the world. And yes, sometimes those friends are going to feel annoying because they live in this like ignorance is bliss place. And there are going to be days where that feels hard,
Yeah.
but it's a hard you need to have
Mm.
because otherwise your world becomes other people who agree with you that the world is awful,
Mm.
and then all you're going to feel about the world is that it's awful because that's all you have coming in are those stories.
Man, that's so good. Yeah.
Right. I wonder
It's
too about like expectations. Like that's a piece I see showing up a lot is like
yeah.
we have this framework for what I imagine the work's going to be like, right? Like I got into it because I thought it was going to
Oh
be
yeah.
my opportunity to be a helper, right?
Yeah.
So like as a therapist, I got into it because I was going to like make people feel better and I was going to make nobody feel depressed or suicidal ever again.
Right.
Um, there's a never ending supply of depressed, suicidal people.
Yep.
No matter how much I do the things, it doesn't stop. It won't stop. It will
Yeah.
always be there.
Yeah.
Right. I think the same is true for any helping professional, despite my great expectations going in. It doesn't look the way I thought it was going to look, whether that's the pressure is way higher than I expected because we're understaffed and underpaid and
Mm.
undervalued.
Mm.
Whether that's one of the things I hear about a lot from people is like, I only get this much of the story and I never know how it ends,
Oh,
which I
wow.
find fascinating, right? Like we think about like nursing and we have all these like TV shows that exist
Yeah.
where
Yeah.
we get, as like viewers, we get to see the end of the story. We see the person go home and live happily ever after,
Yes.
but the nurse in the story didn't,
Yes.
right? Like,
Yes.
and I think we've created this framework for believing that there's this like moment where we get to watch that person go home and know that their life is better because we did a thing. Hilariously, like every first responder I talk to talks about how, like, you know, we showed up on scene and we performed CPR and then we turfed to the paramedics. And
Wow.
then the paramedics show up and they take them to the
Yeah.
emerge and then they turf to the nurses and emerge. And then emerge turfs up to a unit. And like
Mhm.
no one knows what happened,
Wow.
right? To be able to go, like, I actually did something that made a difference because
Yes.
all I did was compressions. And then I have no idea if they lived or died.
Yes. You know what you're saying that jumps out at me is human beings are meaning makers and storytellers. And
Yes,
so what I'm hearing you say is everybody hates the experience of walking into a movie that you're hyped up for and arriving 30 minutes late and then having to leave 20 minutes early. That would drive you mental. And if
totally.
that's what we're going through in our workspace, that's brutal. And
Yeah.
I think, there's a systemic response to that of people having like the storytelling of the entire journey for that particular person that you helped. Um, I wonder if there's, maybe there's a thing where the frontline worker, maybe it's the firefighter who did the CPR on site.
Mhm.
I wonder if they would have to fight for the rest of the story, which that's the two-edged sword. Because on one hand,
Yep.
it helps them. On the other hand, it's more work they have to do to
Yep.
like self-care. But that's hard to not
It's
be able to
super
know the whole
hard.
story.
It's super hard.
Yeah.
It's funny. I remember having someone who shared with me that they saw this like newspaper clipping that came out about a person who had done
Yeah.
something kind of cool and extraordinary
Yeah.
and pieced together the name as a connection to a call they had done 10 years earlier on a kid
What?
and being like, oh, he lived and then lived to be this person who's
Whoa.
doing this like really cool, amazing thing. And he goes, I sent that clipping off to every person who I remembered was on that shift. And I'm like, you
Wow.
remembered 10 years ago who was on that shift? He's like, I totally remember who was on
Yep.
that shift.
Yep.
I sent it out to all of them and was like, hey guys, this was that kid. And they were all like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for sharing this. Like it felt so meaningful to
Yes.
have this like bookend on a call that was really hard and very uncertain and no one knew what would happen.
Yep.
And not only that, like the kid lived, which is cool on its own. We did that. But
Yep.
then this kid who lived is like going and making the world a cool place. And we created the circumstances for that to happen.
Oh, yes.
Right.
That's
Like,
huge.
but he
That's
goes,
huge.
that's a once in a million, like on the job for something like 25, 30 years. That's like it never happens.
No
Right.
kidding. Man, I wish I could advocate for the supervisors in all of these roles, because it's something that
Yeah.
I'm grateful that in the frontline workers, there's more conscientiousness about their mental health. Thanks be to God.
Yeah.
And yet those supervisors are probably wondering like, well, what do I do? How do I do it? Well, there's one idea right there is
Yeah.
potentially have time carved out for each staff member to be able to follow up with a case or something that is haunting them or they
Yeah.
can't shake. Let the story come full circle. And those things are huge. I mean, we know this in the therapeutic world. That's essentially trauma is this
Yeah.
horrible dynamic that's occurred and the story can't conclude. Like it's just
Totally.
replaying the terrible parts over and over again.
Yeah.
So that'd be, I mean, ideas for supervisors to advocate for their staff, to be
Well,
able
and
to
I
do
think
some stuff.
too, yeah, totally. I mean, I think that would be really cool. Practically, I'm curious how that would look, but I think it'd be
Yeah.
so cool. But
Yeah.
like, I also think it's a little bit like how we shape those expectations. Like, I
Mm.
wish that training programs spent more time addressing,
Yep.
like, these are some of the major hangups that are creating mental health challenges for people. And how do we on the front end acknowledge that what you are going into is not going to look or feel the way you think it's going to look and feel?
Yeah.
Right. So like that glorious moment where you get to like do all the right things and that person lives, and then you get to watch them go home. You don't get that very often. And
Yeah.
so how do we prepare you to have different expectations? Because maybe
Yes.
if our expectations weren't so off kilter from reality, we
Yes.
wouldn't live so much time feeling disappointed or
Mm.
disillusioned by that experience.
Mhm.
Maybe we would like learn to measure it differently.
Yes.
So like maybe our success isn't measured by whether that person lives or dies or goes home to a happy life. Maybe we measure it by like, I did great compressions, right? And
That's
like,
so good.
can we learn to adapt how we're thinking about the
I
expectations?
in my work, I would say that's an essential dynamic, and the language
Right?
I use is we have to define what a win is.
Yeah.
And so, what's a win right here? And I'm working these days with a lot of very high up religious leaders,
Mm-hmm.
in the particularly in the Catholic Church. So just
Yeah.
Google Catholic Church scandal, and you get a sense of what the kind of stuff we're facing here.
Yeah.
And so, the win for them can be so difficult because all they're dealing with is another person and another person and another
Yeah.
person who's done harm. And
Yeah.
so those dynamics are very, very tough. But redefining the win is huge. And like just
Yeah.
it's exactly what you're saying, having to adjust expectations, having to
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge the temptation to have the savior complex
Yeah.
and navigate that in reality, in community, honestly. I don't know how you do it otherwise, honestly. I cannot comprehend how does somebody make it other than high levels of dissociation, substances that help you check out.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm like, no wonder there's a lot of
Anger,
addictions in these domains.
irritability, right? Like, yeah, totally. I
Yeah.
mean, I think too, like we do this as therapists, right? Like I had a supervision session yesterday where I was working with a new clinician,
Mm,
graduated maybe 6 months ago.
mhm,
And he was talking about like, how do I know when I end? Like when it's time to encourage a client to end. And I was like, well, tell me what's motivating your thought that it needs to end.
mm.
And he's like, well, they're not making progress. And I was like, so tell me about what progress like looks like. What does that mean? What's the
Yes.
marker? And
Yes.
he's like, well, like they're not getting better.
Right.
I was like, right, but like what's better? Like how do we define what's better? And is it your job to make them be that, or is it your job to partner them with like acceptance and care and nurturing and the ability
Yeah.
for them to be better, right?
Lindsay, like you are articulating, I would say, the if not one of the core reasons I burnt out. Like, that
Yes.
is exactly why I burnt out,
Yeah.
because I my concepts of working with someone was from severely traumatized to thriving. That
Yeah.
was my goal standards. And so, well,
Yeah.
what is thriving? It means their entire family relationships are very solid, they're doing really well, their work life is very solid, doing well, their physical life's really solid. If they're come from a faith background, their spiritual life is really solid.
Mm.
That's like a lifetime, but I couldn't see it in the moment,
Yeah.
and I thought that was normal. I was like, "Well,
Yeah.
what else would I be doing?
Right. Like,
I'm a
isn't
lame
that my
therapist."
job?
Yeah, isn't that what they're
Right.
paying me for? And that's huge, like, so huge.
Right.
That killed me. So, I wish
Well,
it
and I think that's the
yeah,
piece. Like, it is. It's not sustainable when that becomes the measure of our success in the
yeah,
job we're doing. I get you for 1 hour
yeah,
once a week at best.
yeah,
Um, you live this whole life pre me,
yeah,
right? Like 30 years of your life has existed before I show up on the scene. And then I get you for this tiny little snippet of time.
yeah.
I mean, for me, a win is, are you still alive and coming home to the children who really need you there?
That's so good.
Because
Yeah.
I don't want to own your funeral. I'm not
Yep,
okay with that.
yep,
Right. So
yep,
like win for me that day,
yep,
if that's what's happening.
yeah,
Right. A little bit better of a win for me if you actually like connect with them a little bit and they like you. Right. Like
right, right.
that extra level up
Yeah,
win. Right. Like, But can we scale that? Like, I cannot undo all of the history that has happened
Yes.
and own all of that for you. And I can't own the like many hours in a week that do not exist with me, where you may or
Yes.
may not be able to
Yes.
implement all the things right? Like,
Yep.
owning that will kill me
Yep.
100%.
I mean, it's one of the reasons that I'm not as I don't spend as much of my time in therapy these days, because I think I've seen the systemic needs of just people, and so
Yeah.
I'm trying to broaden out. And part of it's I like the other domains, like education or whatever,
Hmm.
to support a person. Because you're right, like if you look at the expectation of a therapist, I'm going to give you this is a generous thing. Like I'm going to give you 30, 40 1 hour sessions,
Yeah.
and we're going to make some I remember doing with working with clients, and these would be people who had like severe trauma, like early
Yeah.
childhood sexual abuse, things like that. And I would do the math for them periodically, because they would get down on themselves and they'd be like, Jake,
Yeah.
I've been seeing you for a year, 2 years, nothing's
Yeah.
changed. And I would do the math and I would say,
Hmm.
let's take an hour, let's make it 8-hour days and put it all together, and let's actually look at it like real lifetime. And it was
Hmm.
almost always like, actually, we've been seeing each other for 2 weeks.
Right.
When you put all the numbers together,
In the
like,
scheme of your 40-year
right.
lifespan.
Yeah, I've worked with you for a
Totally.
month now. I
Hmm.
think we're doing okay, and there's the
Yeah.
perspective shift, the expectation adjustment that has to be rooted in reality, instead of
Yeah.
the interpretations that we bring that aren't rooted in
Yeah.
reality. You're mentioning something else that's coming to my mind, which is compassion fatigue. Um,
Hmm.
I noticed that the longer I was in therapy, and I've noticed this with friends who are cops, nurses,
Yeah.
firefighters, our humor gets darker and darker.
Yep.
And I was like, "What's going on?" Like, I can joke
Yeah.
about some pretty dark stuff, what's
Hmm.
happening there, and it's like I'm coping. I'm trying to cope because what I'm dealing with is so intense, and when you have to be caring or on or whatever it is, and you're
Hmm.
doing that over and over and over again, that muscle gets tired,
Yeah.
and then it starts shaking, and then it just doesn't wanna do it anymore. And
Yeah.
so I'm conscientious of the various ways and domains that occurs for the varying people that are in, you know, the audience that are listening to this, that
Hmm.
compassion fatigue, it's hard. And so one of the things I learned is that it's okay for me to be taken care of. And so I've consistently gone to therapy myself.
Hmm.
And people look and go, "Oh, wow, you still have a lot of issues." I'm like, "No, it's not about big issues. It's
Yeah.
about, if I don't do this, I will crash and burn again."
Right. It's our
Um,
maintenance.
yep, it's maintenance.
Yeah,
Yep,
totally. Well, and it's so important. Like, I think that we forget that we're a resource, but we're also a limited one,
yeah,
right? So, like, I know that I do really good work, and I know
yeah,
that the work I do matters, but it can only matter to the extent that I let myself stay well enough to do it.
yep,
So, right? Like, if I did a job where I really need my car to do that job, if I'm like a delivery person,
yep,
I probably put more energy into maintaining that car because
you're
I
right.
rely on it for my livelihood. I rely on this
Yeah,
for my
you're the
livelihood.
product. Yeah,
I am the product. And
yeah,
so I have to set boundaries around me. I
yeah,
have to protect me. I have to refuel me. I have to do things that keep me well because if I'm not well, ain't nobody well.
yeah, that's
Right?
so
And so
true.
how do we invest in that? And like you and I are in jobs where that's true. So is everybody listening. Like
Yep,
the people who are listening to this are the best people at their jobs. And I think it's one of
yeah,
the reasons I started this podcast is because I was so upset of hearing about people who, if my kid was sick, if my kid was injured, if my kid was in danger,
wow,
they're the people I would want showing up. They're like
wow,
the best people. And they're the ones that are like, I don't know if I can keep doing this, Lindsay.
oh,
And it kills me to imagine that we're losing the best
yes,
people.
Yes.
because we are pitting them in positions where they are so burnt out, and we fail to deliver them skills that help them to safeguard themselves within those systems, because the
Yeah.
systems will always demand more.
Yes.
So how do
Yes.
we hold that space that says, I still have to protect me in this because I'm a limited resource, but the
I
world
love that.
really needs it?
Yeah, you're talking about to me, that's the word that comes to my mind is stewardship. I'm the only thing
Yes.
that I have to offer people, so I have to steward myself well, otherwise
Yeah.
it'll run out. Like I
Yeah.
love the car analogy because every single car comes with the book that's in the glove compartment, and the book tells you all the stuff that needs to happen, how you use it,
Totally.
and
At what intervals?
yeah, and all the if you don't do it here, right? And what's funny is my in-laws, they're from Scotland, and I remember one time my father-in-law, he was driving his car, and there was smoke coming out of the back, and I was like, is that I don't think that's good." And he's like, "Oh, it doesn't matter. I don't want to pay for, they're just trying to take my
Oh.
money." And I looked up at the little clear sticker in the corner of his rearview mirror. It was like 3 years ago when he got his oil changed, and I thought, "Okay, well, you know what happened? His car broke down and it didn't work
Yeah.
anymore, so he had to buy a new car, and he ended up spending way more money on the new car than it would have been to maintain the one he had."
Mhm.
And it was so
Mhm.
ironic because he refused to
Yeah.
steward the thing that he was using. Yeah,
I love the word stewardship. I've actually been using it a lot in my life lately, and I love that that's the word that came up for you. And I
yeah,
think what's interesting is like when we, because it's not just about work, right? Like it's
yeah,
not just about I need to steward this well to do the job I do well.
yeah,
It's also that, again, if I'm a finite resource, I only have so much of myself to offer my work, but also like my whole life, right? So like
yeah,
who I then am when I come home at the end of the day. And you touched earlier on the like, it's no wonder that we have so many first responders and frontline workers who struggle with addictions,
yeah,
who, right? Like, I see the divorce rate for that population is so much higher. The rate of like poor parent child relationships is
yeah,
much higher, right? Like, there are all of these ways that it's showing up
mhm,
in how we then feel like this is all I have left to cope,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that's the part that I feel really sad about is like we've got these people who really wanted to make the world a better place.
mhm,
And it's hard for them to even just like come home and be with the people they care most about.
yeah.
That
That
feels tragic.
it is true. I mean, Lindsay, that is probably some of the most difficult but honest feedback I've gotten from my own family is
Hmm.
it used to be, "Oh, no, it's Tuesday." And that's how it was when my kids were younger, is
Hmm.
Tuesdays, for some reason, I had a lot of clients who were just really had a lot of intensity.
Yeah.
And I mean, if I can say it, and I mean this in all the right ways, like, I loved those people. I really
Hmm.
wanted the best for them.
Yeah.
It was not a romantic thing. I I cared deeply for them,
Yeah.
but it was a lot. And so I would come home and I would walk through the door, and here's the sad part is I wasn't aware of how I was walking through the
Hmm.
door because I was more like carrying myself through the door.
Yeah.
And Heather and my kids were awesome, but I've come to find out later that they knew that it was Tuesday, and it
Hmm.
was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, it's Tuesday." And that's really sad for me that my
Yeah.
kids have this impression of Tuesdays now. Like,
Hmm.
"Oh, it's Tuesday." And maybe they'll be in therapy
Yeah.
one day going, "I don't know why, but I have this weird hatred of
Yeah.
Tuesdays." And that's probably where it'll end up. But
Totally.
I didn't even see it. And then
Hmm.
when it was particularly my wife started to ask me to look at it, I was really defensive about it because I was like, "Do you realize
Mm.
what I'm doing? Do you realize these people I'm taking care
Right.
of?" And I didn't have boundaries. I didn't
Hmm.
have my capacity to say no was really low because I carried a lot of shame and a lot of need for
Mhm.
validation, and I was good at therapy. I still am good at it,
Yeah.
and I brought a lot of young places in me, I think, there, and,
Mhm.
I was bringing more to the workplace than maybe I should have, and I got weirdly attached to it, for the wrong kinds of
Mhm.
ways. And I don't know if that's everybody, but I know
Yeah,
if that is going on, that stuff is powerful. And so you get
totally.
defensive of it. People try to tell you something about it and you snap back.
Mm,
And the sad part, and you and I have seen it, is you see the kid of the doctor. You
mhm.
see and I used to see them as adults. Like, yeah, my dad was
Yeah.
a doctor, my dad was a police officer, my dad was a lawyer or
Mhm.
whatever, and I never saw them. And
Yeah.
you have this systemic generational dynamic that goes on. And yeah, it's hard because you're doing good work. And yet
Mhm.
when you help this person, that other person ends up suffering, and that tension is brutal. That's a really hard tension to manage,
Mm,
which I love what you're doing. Like, that's the point of your
mhm.
podcast, is to try to
Yeah.
support people in those tensions. It's awesome.
Yeah, totally. It is a hard tension. And I think it's like one of the things I think is advantageous in my work is I pick a lot of the things I'm doing, right?
Yeah,
I could see less clients. I could, right? Like I have the power to tweak some
yeah,
of the things I take on to recalibrate that balance if and when. And I think the really hard thing for a lot of people who are listening is that they're in systems that kind of don't give a crap.
yeah,
So like, right, like still need you to show up for that overtime shift or still calling out because they're understaffed and are desperately trying to just get three more butts in chairs
yeah,
to cover, right? And it's hard because there will always be that level of demand. The
yeah,
system is not going to change substantially.
yeah,
It's just not.
yeah,
And and then that's what we're working within,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking of friends that are nurses that, like you said, they're the best ones. They're the
Mhm.
ones that you want when you're sick to be at your side.
Yeah.
And what's weird is that they also seem to be the ones who will take the shift because they're thinking of, you know, John, who was in a car
Yeah.
accident and is on life support. And if their coworker doesn't show up, who will be there for John? And so their
Yeah.
heart is so good. And
Mhm.
then you do that enough, they're not there anymore for any more Johns or anybody else, you know, that's
Totally.
there. It's like, oh, it's so hard.
It's so hard. Well, and it's funny. No, it's not funny. Funny is the wrong word.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because it's not even just about the Johns. It's so often what I hear about is if I don't go in, I know what it feels like to be the nurse who's on when it's short
Oh,
and
wow.
drowning. And
Wow.
so it's like a rescuing my coworkers. It's I
Wow.
would want them to do it for me if I was the one on. So
Wow.
I'll do it for them. And the challenge with it, and this is hard. I admit this is hard what I'm about to say
Yeah.
is if we don't let the system fall apart sometimes,
Mm.
people up the chain don't know how broken it is.
Yep.
So if we're always finding a way to make it okay,
Yeah.
right? If we're always answering the call out, we're always finding ways to just stem the flow of how bad it is.
Yeah.
Um, higher up the chain looks down and goes, "We're staffed, it's fine." Or we're close enough, like we're understaffed, but it's like we're in the realm of
Right.
reason.
Right.
So we're fine. We don't need to do any urgent hiring. We don't need to push anything. It's fine.
Right.
Um, I've joked a little bit that if I were to write a book right now, it would be called Burn It All to the Ground. Because that's where I feel like I'm at is just encouraging everyone to like, don't go, let it fall apart, let it burn to the ground, because it's the only way we're going to get a real look at how bad it really is
Yeah.
for anyone in a position of authority to do anything about it,
Yeah. Yeah.
which
And why
sucks.
it does suck. I don't understand that dynamic of, why is it in these domains, the essential services, the like, I don't understand. Why are these the domains that, I'm sure there's people out there with smart answers, but I mean, it's true. Like, you see the TV show where the boss actually has to come down and do the other person's job, and then their attentiveness and their compassion goes up, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea." Because
Mm-hmm.
sitting at a desk all day is very different than
Yeah.
like putting out a fire or chasing down a bad guy or CPR or like
Right.
IVs or whatever, everybody's
Yep.
doing. It's just a whole different experience and yeah, when you let it burn to the ground, that's so hard for the people who care because they
Yep.
think of all the, but
Totally.
but we can't, and yeah.
Yeah.
What do you like? What if it burns to the ground? What happens then, and how do you resurrect it? Because if all it does is burn and it doesn't come back to life, then I don't, it feels just now we're just sitting in ashes. Like,
Yeah.
where do you go?
Totally. I mean, the honest answer is I have no idea what it
Okay,
would look like. I think
sure,
I have some thoughts about what I would hope it to look like.
I get you.
And I think the challenge, I was having a conversation with a friend over the weekend about this. We were talking about the problem with leadership and management.
Yeah,
And this person works for a policing organization. So they get it. And I had said, like, I think the challenge is that he was talking about how his leadership doesn't do good at leading. And I said, right, from your perspective, right? So,
yes,
like, as the boots on the ground people,
yeah,
they're not a great leader, but they're exactly the kind of leader that their leadership loves because they're the
wow,
kind of person who doesn't give a crap about you and your home life, you and your whatever. He just
wow,
needs you to show up to work and do the job
wow,
and meet the standards and hit the
okay,
quotas.
yeah,
And as long as you're doing that, he's happy. And
mm,
that's the to be in leadership in so many of these systems, it almost invites a certain kind of person.
I
And
get you.
it's the kind of person who doesn't connect as much to the like humanity of what we're doing here
Yes,
because it's the kind of person who is willing to make the hard calls to cut
yes,
and willing, right? Like kind of willing to do the dirty work.
yes,
The challenge to that is that it has this trickle down effect that makes a mess out of all of the actual frontline work.
yes,
If we let it, to some extent, the reason that continues to operate is because on paper it still looks like it's functioning.
sure does. Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
so the people up in those levels don't have to be accountable to how broken it is because it's only broken for the people who are operating the frontline part of it. It
yes,
hasn't burned to the ground.
yes,
Theoretically, if it were to burn to the ground,
yeah, yeah.
which is still not my favorite answer to the things. I
I
wish
get you.
that weren't the answer.
Yeah,
But if it is, I think there's an opportunity for there to be a real hard look at accountability for those levels of leadership that say, how did we get here? And what's
uh,
wrong here at this level of leadership that's created this monster?
yes,
And how do we then learn to implement different systems and put in different kinds of people who are motivated by different kinds of things and actually care about the entirety of the system, the
yes,
entirety of the flow to
yes,
support it being more sustainable for everybody.
yes,
But that will mean dollar bills. It will mean,
yeah,
right, like time and energy. It will mean like investing differently
yes,
into this thing.
yes.
And I think unless it really falls apart, no one wants to look hard enough to do that.
What I'm hearing you say, which is, it's almost like n- when it burns to the ground, you're forced to look at the reality. And there's a convenience when it continues to function that you can look the other direction. And it's
Mm-hmm.
almost like you have to face reality when it
Yeah.
burns to the ground. And
Well, and I think it would burn like, yes, that and like
yeah,
right now, like BC has this paramedic staffing ambulance shortage, right? We keep hearing
okay,
about it on the news, the long
yeah,
wait
yeah,
times for ambulance services.
yeah,
A lot of the articles that are written, a lot of the, radio shows and newscasts that are talking about it talk about the paramedics, right? Like they're talking about like they're the problem. We just
uh,
need more dedicated people. We just need people who show up for their shifts. We just need, right? Like why aren't they coming? We've got lots of them. Why aren't they coming to work?
uh,
Why are they calling in? What's the problem?
right,
But we're not asking the question that's like, but why aren't they coming to work? They're not coming to work because they're burnt out, because this level of leadership is failing to support, right? Like, we're
yes,
not looking up the chain. We're just
yeah,
asking, we're like blame shifting, right? So we put
yes,
all the blame on the front line, right? When COVID
yes,
was happening, well, why aren't nurses showing? Well, nurses are tapped. Like
yeah,
they're
no kidding.
fried
Yeah.
Why are we not asking the question of why leadership isn't better and more effectively supporting them so that they can keep showing up?
Wow.
Right.
Wow.
And so I think part of it is like burn it to the ground so that we stop pointing the finger at the people who have the least amount of power to make it better.
Yes. Have you seen, you're reminding me of one of my favorite scenes from TV.
Okay.
I'm assuming you've heard of the show New Amsterdam.
I love New
Okay.
Amsterdam.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
How can I help?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's the scene when he's early on in the job and he calls everybody in and he like
Mhm.
fires half the people.
Yes.
That is, I don't know why, but it's such an inspiring scene. And I think it's on multiple levels. One, it's like finally, it
Yeah.
feels like hope, finally. But he's not a jerk about it. He's really
Yeah.
direct, but
Totally.
you can see the goodness of his heart coming out. And you know
Yeah.
what's funny is that when I watch that, what it does for me is it begs a question: am I willing to do what's required for
Hmm.
the really good to occur, not just the
Yeah.
mediocre to
Yeah.
occur? And I have to watch things like that and
Yeah.
remind myself of things like that because, you know, there's this concept of think about your eulogy virtues. It's like from
Yeah.
the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, I think. Um, and that's the kind of thing I would want on my headstone. That's the kind of thing I would want somebody to
Yeah.
say at my funeral is, you know, he was he was willing to get into the arenas that were messy so that
Hmm.
at least hopefully something could grow and could become better.
Yeah.
And I love that scene. And I'm
Hmm.
like, there we go. That's the kind of guy
Yeah.
that I want to be. But it's scary, to
It's
walk in
super
those
scary.
situations. And you know what's
Yeah.
weird is that I think partly for that character, he has perspective because of his own health issues.
Hmm.
So he sees the world in a different way than most
Yeah.
other people, which motivates him to make decisions that really matter instead of playing it safe.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Well, and I think I have this joke. I'm gonna get in trouble for this later in life, and that's fine. But I have this joke about my youngest daughter. So my youngest daughter is my more boisterous child.
Yeah.
She's intense and she's fierce and she's her mother in a smaller body.
Nice.
She's stubborn as hell. Like
Yeah.
she's all the big feelings.
Yeah.
And I often joke that she's going to make a really amazing human someday if I let her live that long. Like that's the job is I just have to like
Yeah.
let that happen. I
Right.
just have to like not kill her first.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's the hard part because right now it's hard to parent, but oh my God, she's going to be like a mover and a shaker someday.
Wow.
And
Wow.
I think of it kind of like that, like to get to the point where you can be in a position to have the kind of authority and influence
Yeah.
to integrate and like infiltrate the existing culture and make meaningful change at like a higher systems level is a magical goal. I think it's so good. It's why we've run this Dare to Lead series twice on the podcast, is
Mm.
because it's the only version of a not burn it to the ground reality that I can imagine is how do we create like a generation of equipped leaders who are willing to go the distance to
Yeah.
get the culture shifted. It
Yeah.
has to be an inside job. It's like an internal rebellion. That's the
Awesome.
only way it happens.
Mm.
But how do we let ourselves get there when everything presses against it? And
Mm.
so we feel that resistance as people and we're impacted by that resistance. We're burnt out by that resistance.
Yeah.
And so the really good people who have that kind of heart that he has in New Amsterdam,
Yeah.
who really do want to like wholeheartedly bring themselves into the work that they do and into leadership that would transition and transform some of these systems, it's so hard to hold on to that and get there when there's all of this stuff that pushes that back and says, no, that doesn't fit. No, we don't want that. No, that doesn't, right? Like
Yes.
it can't flourish here. I think
Yes.
what's magical about that show is he had this opportunity to create that space.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there are spaces where it can happen and is happening, but they're hard to find, and it's hard for people to hold on long enough to get there.
Yeah, I agree. It's reminding me of something that I've been inspired to focus in on in my own life, which is a really hard question to answer, but to me, one of the most important questions. And it's, what am I all about?
Yeah.
And when I know what
Yeah.
I'm all about and what matters most to me, then the question when I go to work every day or do whatever I do is a question of integrity as
Yeah.
opposed to a figuring it out in the moment.
Yeah.
And so if I'm a person who values authenticity, or I'm a person who values honesty or whatever, then if that's who I am and that's what I'm all about, then I don't have to figure that out. Should I say something? Should I not? How do I do
Mm.
this? How do I,
Yeah.
that for me is really helpful because I get overwhelmed in all the situations that are demanding a lot. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of situations that demand a lot these days.
Hmm.
But to figure it out in the moment is too much, and then the moment's gone. And
Yeah.
I have regret, and I woulda, coulda, shoulda stuff.
Totally.
And it hasn't been easy to step back and say, like, what am I all about? But once some of those things get settled, I can't say that I'm like, I'm there, that would just be a
Yeah.
lie. But some of it is settled. And then
Yeah.
what's weird is that when I, lay my head down on the pillow at the end of the day, I have to ask myself, was I myself today?
Hmm.
And I like that question way better
Yeah.
than who screwed me over today.
Totally.
It puts some agency back in my corner, and it's risky and it's hard. So I think about
Yeah.
your daughter, and I think about, I mean, I know you're joking and you're a great
Yeah.
mom, and it sounds like what, parenting is a lot of this, where we're trying to help our kids discover who they are and
Hmm.
then release them on the world in
Yeah.
all the wonderful ways.
Yeah.
And when that hasn't happened, we were tossed about by all the changing of the tides and all of that, and
Hmm.
we can't weather a lot. And I think the systems, when we know what we're about, systems start to shake a bit that are
Yeah.
unhealthy because,
Yeah.
wow, these people aren't going to tolerate things. They know what matters and they're standing up for, and they've thought about what matters. They've
Mm.
genuinely pressed in
Yeah.
and come to terms with it. Um, for me, that's been really, really helpful.
Hmm.
And a link to that, this is one of the things that brought me to, was answering the question of, um, am I a therapist? Was the
Hmm.
question I had to wrestle with, because
Yeah.
what it got me into was this dynamic of, is that my identity?
Hmm.
What happens to me if I don't offer therapy to anybody else? Do I still matter? And
Hmm.
the weaving together of my identity with what I do is a touchy, difficult situation that I've had to be very careful with, because
Yeah.
I can bring too much of that to the workplace, and
Hmm.
that's not good. And then, yeah, like I said earlier, there's too many dynamics in the room that have nothing to do with why I'm in the room.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
Hmm. There are so many good pieces in that. I'm having a hard time picking which one to go.
No.
um, because I think that there's really cool pieces in terms of that authenticity thing, like that question about who am I?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I actually like that question even better than like, how was your day? Or how was my day today? Like, can we evaluate differently? Again,
Yes.
kind of back to that measuring stick
Yep.
question, like how do we measure what a win looks like?
Yep.
How do I measure my day? How do I measure, did I feel aligned today? Did I feel like I operated in a way that felt like genuine? Do I
Yes.
feel like I was a version of me that I can look back on and be like, yeah, that was pretty good.
Yep.
We did good, right?
Yep.
And maybe that gives us a different power to evaluate than was the day good or bad, because that can be defined by so many other things. Did someone
Yes.
cut me off in traffic? Did I, right, like did I get my coffee this morning? Like so many things
Right.
affect how I think about my day.
Right.
But who was I today? How did I show up today, and can I feel pleased with that?
Yeah. It
And if
makes me
not, how do I want to tweak it?
Yeah, I'm thinking about I mean, imagine being a paramedic on the job and maybe you have the radio on and you hear people ripping paramedics.
Mhm.
That's really hard because the job's
Mhm.
already hard, let alone
Yeah.
when the people are yelling
Yeah.
at you from the sidelines saying you're not doing a good enough job. And, like, how do you
Mhm.
weather those things? To me, that's a critical thing is I'm a big fan of Teddy Roosevelt's, and this is Dare to Lead, this is Brené Brown through and through,
Yeah.
is Man in the Arena.
Totally. Man in the
Like,
arena.
that is a huge, like, I literally have it on my wall right over here, and
Yeah.
I look at it regularly, and I have to, like, it isn't the critic who counts.
Yeah.
I That is a hard reality to purify out, at least for me, and that part of
Mhm.
that journey has been exactly what we're talking about right now is,
Yeah.
like, what am I all about? And
Yeah.
I evaluate my day in a standard against myself. I'm not
Mhm.
evaluating my day based on what the radio show said about me or what
Yeah.
did I get likes on my Instagram or, there's so many ways that we, like you're saying, we can evaluate it.
Yeah.
Um, to me, that was a fairly solid one.
Totally. Well, and I think that that's maybe one of those pieces that can be protective of um, that kind of capacity to be wholehearted in the job without letting it kind of squash your humanity is
Yeah.
that like regular touching in with who am I? Like one of the things I think happens a lot is just the like monotony of life where we just like show
Yeah.
up and do the thing and go
Yeah.
home and do those things and go to bed and do it all again.
Yeah.
And when we get caught in that cycle, we get very mindless about who we are and how we're showing up and how we're measuring what the wins look like
Yeah.
and interact with it. And so to be more intentional about kind of touching in with those pieces with some amount of regularity to say, actually, I need to sit with this question of how do I feel about who I was today?
Yes.
And is that aligned with the kind of person I choose to be in the world? And if not, what's getting in the way of that? And how do I account for that? Whether that's I probably need to go do some therapy to kind of get back into myself, or
Yep.
I maybe need to cut back on the drinking that's numbing me from being able to really connect with
Bingo.
this question well, or right, like whatever those things, I need to be around more people who remind me that laughter is a good thing that exists in the
Yes.
world. Like there's lots of versions of what that might look like. But if we don't pause to ask the question and to sit with the discomfort that might live there, we will not ever have an answer and we will just continue through the monotony until we're so burnt out that we can't.
Yes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I think hopefully, at least this is my journey, is what I do when I go to work every day is a place to express who I am. It's not necessarily where I define myself.
Yeah.
And that nuance might seem minor or small, but it's been a really big dynamic for me
Yeah.
because the critics can be loud and
Totally.
I'm sensitive to them. Um,
Yeah.
and so I'm thinking about, I mean, especially in with your audience of frontline workers, because the nature of the work is so sensitive.
Hmm.
One bad day has
Yeah.
significant ramifications, and so the pressure cooker is super high to
Totally.
perform well. And I mean, you
Yeah.
see it a lot in the police domain because one wrong assessment, one wrong thing, and you're splattered
Yeah.
all over the news for all kinds of stuff. And maybe you just had a lapse of judgment, which happens to people.
Yeah.
But if your identity is wrapped up in that, that is like really a bad
Totally.
day. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's super destabilizing.
Yeah.
It would be. Yeah. All right, Jake. I feel like we probably need to wrap up, but I am
Great.
so, so grateful for this time with you.
Thanks.
And I feel like we've not solved any of the world's problems today, but I love that I feel like we've like named them all and put them on the table at least,
Yeah. Yeah.
and maybe poked at a couple of ideas of how to maybe at least band-aid some things for a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
Lindsay. Thanks so much for having me. And you know what? Something that I've thought about that it's just coming to mind right now, and I want to
Yeah.
wrap up with this is um, I don't right now. I don't have to say anything to your audience, and honestly, I feel like there's a lot, there's this whole thing where, when any news cycle comes out, there's this, it feels like we have to thank the frontline workers. And I agree with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I imagine some of them feel like it's empty
Mm-hmm.
and it's just rote. You don't understand. And I
Yeah.
genuinely want to say thank you. Like, I genuinely
Yeah.
want to say thank you. I'm doing jujitsu now, and I roll, is what they call it, like sparring,
Yeah.
with firefighters and police officers. That's the majority of the people
Yeah.
there. And so these are people who are in my life now, and I'm genuinely
Mm-hmm.
grateful for what they do every day. I have
Yeah.
friends who are nurses, and I see what they pour out. Like, I'm genuinely grateful. And so I just want to say thank you, and not like and I'd like to thank all the people who blah, 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 because it's a news take, right? No, like,
Yeah.
genuinely. So
Yeah.
thanks for what you're doing, and thanks for your listeners for what they do. Like, it matters, and I'm grateful.
Appreciate it, Jake. Thanks so much for being here. It was great to have you.
Thanks.
All right. I want to extend one more really big thank you to Jake for making the time to join me today. As we wrap up today, let me remind you that if you value this podcast and want to help us in our mission to support frontline wellness, there are 3 ways that you can help us to do exactly that. Number 1, you can rate and review Behind the Line on Apple Podcast or wherever else you might be listening. Number 2, follow me on social media at Lindsay A. Foss and engage with me and this amazing little community that we're building there. Every time that you like, comment, and share our posts, you help us to spread like wildfire, thanks to the magic of the algorithm. And last but not least, share this resource and our other resources with those you know. If you would like a poster or info cards about the podcast for your workplace, send me an email at support@thrive-life.ca. Know that we can be found online on our website, on most major podcast platforms, as well as on YouTube. We make all of our resources available to you because the work you do matters. But way more than that, you matter. And we want to make sure that you have what you need to keep up the good work at work, as well as in your real life outside of the work. So use it and share it. And until next time, stay safe.